American history is taught completely wrong. U.S. history is always either taught from the point of action or from the perspective of the victims of violence. But we were never taught from the perspective of the beneficiary of said violence. That's why people can't recognize that fascism is happening right now. As a matter of fact, you can think about the civil rights movement. Imagine you are a black child that's integrating into an all-white school. Walking to and from school, you worried about if you're going to get back home, getting spit on, you getting harassed. Meanwhile, your white classmates are only worried about the Sadie Hawkins dance that's happening on Thursday. Culturally speaking, the beneficiaries of violence and the victims of violence are living two completely different lives within the same nation. Let's take it over to World War II Germany. They were living like we are right now. They were going to movies. They were getting their kids ready to go to school. They were still paying bills. Their economy for a while was doing pretty good. Aside from some changes to law enforcement, I'm pretty sure the average German citizen lived a normal life. And they could do that because the Jewish ghettos weren't on Main Street. Auschwitz was in Poland. It was not in Germany. It was pretty much out of sight, out of mind. A concurrent history has to be taught to a free and privileged population. And you need it from those 3 points that I mentioned earlier, from the point of action, from the perspective of the victim of violence, and from the perspective of the beneficiary of said violence. So now, because we've stitched together a history that doesn't make chronological sense, we're now repeating the same thing over and over and don't even know it.
The whole history of America is the history of rich white men telling not rich white people that their enemies are black and brown. It starts in the colonies of what would become the United States. Let's remember, during the colonial period, mid-1600s, there was no such thing as white people. I know some people who are now called white find that shocking, right? Because they think whiteness is real, right? But whiteness was created. Europeans didn't call themselves white. We didn't call ourselves white. We weren't all members of one big happy family. Are you kidding? Have you studied the history of Europe? The history of Europe was about killing each other. That's what we did in Europe. We just killed each other before we figured out there were other people to kill. We just killed each other, right? I mean, that was the history of Europe. The English hated the Irish, right? Northern Italians didn't even think that Southern Italians were Italians. The Germans hated everybody, and everybody hated their ass right back, right? There was no team called white, no race called white, but all of a sudden, in the middle of the 1600s, there was. Why? Why was it suddenly necessary to create this thing called the white race? Well, because rich people can count, that's why. And so rich folks looked around, the ones that owned all the land, you know, in the colonies, the colonial elite looked around and they realized something, that they were heavily outnumbered by African enslaved folks, by European indentured servants who were just one level above a slave, or other Europeans who weren't technically indentured servants, but they were still peasants, didn't have any money, didn't have any land, and they could do the math. They added it up and they were like, damn, we got to figure out a way to split these folks apart from one another or they're going to rise up and take our stuff, right? Because after a while, these black folks who were enslaved Africans and these quote unquote white folks who were poor Europeans are going to figure out they're all getting played by these rich people, right? So ultimately the rich figure out they got to come up with some way to get somebody in that group on their team. The easiest thing is to get the poor Europeans, right? Because at least they look like you. They sort of share some of the customs and the culture. So they all of a sudden create this thing called whiteness and they say, now you're part of the club. Now we're going to let you testify in court, enter into contracts, vote, at least if you're a man, own a little bit of land, at least if you're a man, right? And we're going to get rid of indentured servitude, no more of that, because you're too good for that. And we're going to take the white men, now called white men, and put them on the slave patrol to keep black people in line. Give them a horse and a gun and a badge and make them feel big and powerful, right? They're still poor. They still don't have anything. They didn't pay the slave patrol well, right? Just exploited them, used them as a buffer between the elite and the other poor folks, particularly poor folks of color. And pretty soon the rebellions that occasionally happened where black and white got together to overthrow the elite, those stopped because the divide and conquer had begun to work, right? You could turn people against each other by telling those poor white folks, they got to keep these black people in line. And so that divide and conquer gets initiated in the colonies. Rich white men telling not rich white people that their enemies are black and brown. Fast forward to the Civil War era. And you have, I'm from the South, right? My people, the elite in my part of the country, right, actually announced that the reason they wanted to break away from the Union and possibly go to war with their brothers and sisters to the North was in order to maintain slavery and white supremacy. They said that at the time. We lie about it now. And we say it had nothing to do with that. But of course, at the time, they didn't have any shame about it, so they just said it openly. right? The vice president of the Confederacy, Alexander Stephens, said that the cornerstone of the new government was the great truth that the Negro was not the equal of the white man. So that's the reason the Confederacy was formed and existed. But here's the trick. If I'm rich and I want to go to war to protect my ownership in other human beings, my property, but you're poor and you don't own any enslaved people, why the hell would you go fight to protect my stuff? Because I'm a rich person. I'm not going to fight. Rich people don't go to war. Right? Rich people get poor people to go to war for them, whether it's in 1860 or whether it's during the 1960s or whether it's today, right? Rich folks get doctors to write notes for them that say that they have heel spurs and that's why they can't go to Vietnam. And if you don't know who I'm talking about, you can Google that shit because he's sitting in the White House right now, right? Oh, I can't go fight. I have heel spurs. Send some poor kids to do that for me, please, right? So that's been a long-standing tradition. So the rich have to figure out a way to convince the poor to go fight for them. But that's a hard thing. That's like a hard sell, right? Like how the hell, why would you do that? Why would you go fight to protect my property rights when you don't own anything? The only way you would do it is if that rich person comes to you and says, hey, listen, you gotta go fight because we gotta maintain our way of life because if these people get free, they're gonna take your jobs. No, fool, they already got your job. That's how it works, right? Because if I'm white and I got to charge you $1 a day to work on the farm, but you can get a black person to do it for nothing because you own them, guess who got the job? Free got the job, right? So in a sense, poor white folks would have been better off joining with black folks to overthrow the slave system that would have raised the wage floor of all working people. But they got tricked by rich white men telling them that their enemies were black and brown. Fast forward to the 1930s. And you have white labor leaders. They're not even the elite, right? The labor leaders are not the elite, but they're the elite within the labor movement. And even they had fallen for it at this point. So they didn't want to integrate their unions. And they would say things like, well, we can't have black people and Mexicans and Chinese folks in our unions because if we do that, it's going to reduce the professionalism of our craft. We have to maintain the integrity of our profession. No, fool, you need more people in the damn union is what you need. And if you don't let those folks in, guess what happens when you go out on strike? Who is the boss going to use to replace you? They're going to replace you with the very same black and brown folks that you didn't want to work next to, right? And so at the end of and then you're going to blame them for taking your job rather than the white rich dude for giving it to them, right? Divide and conquer, telling not rich white folks that their enemies are black and brown. And now we fast forward to the president. We got the president of the United States becoming president on the basis of that same rhetoric.
European scholars performed all sorts of intellectual acrobatics to obscure the truth about African advancement. Some even suggested that African accomplishments were the results of visitors from outer space. Any wild idea was more acceptable than to admit that Africans had the intellect and ingenuity to develop and control well-ordered empires. The purpose of all these erroneous theories was simply to justify slavery and attitudes of racial superiority. White supremacists built their bridges, constructed of lies to fill the gap between real African sophistication and false African inferiority. Because of this, a devastatingly unknowable amount of history is lost forever. Pair that with half-hearted archaeology and the Western tendency to ignore the oral histories of indigenous Africans, and you see how difficult it is to be recovered. And history was more than lost, it was banished. As the sun set on the British Empire in the mid-20th century, officials destroyed, removed, and renamed records of imperialist crimes all over the world. "What's burnt won't be missed," cried a British officer as he frantically sifted piles of papers in what was called Operation Legacy, a systematic effort to shape the legacy of the empire post-colonization.
When you look at this side-by-side comparison throughout the bill, it reads like a how-to guide in historical whitewashing. Are you aware that this new version of the bill from the Senate removes the writings of Frederick Douglass?
I am.
Are you aware that this new version of the bill from the Senate removes the writings of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.?
Yes.
Are you aware that this new version of the bill from the Senate removes the history of Native Americans?
The way the bill is laid out,
that's a yes or no question.
Because we were very clear that we could not be conclusive about every single document out there that we could. I'm going to give you an answer. This isn't a trial. I'm going to give you an answer.
Okay, I'm ready for the answer.
The way it's set out is so that a teacher can go to different documents and different authors by which to teach from. It's by no means meant to be a conclusive list.
Let me just ask you one more time. Are you aware that this new version of the bill from the Senate removes the history of Native Americans? It's on page 3 of the side-by-side if you don't have it in front of you.
Then I believe you.
Okay. Are you aware that this new version of the bill removes mentions of Cesar Chavez?
Yes.
Are you aware that this new version of the bill removes mentions of Susan B. Anthony?
Yes, I am.
Yet the new version of the bill from the Senate, this is not the bill we all passed as a House, but the Senate's version, it still includes the writings of Alexis de Tocqueville, and he's not even an American. Could that be because he's a white man?
Not exactly.
White supremacy is American history. White supremacy is America. For those of you still saying this is not the America I know, America is better than this, it's really not. This is how America has always been. America has never been a safe place for Black people. It has never been a safe place for Native or Indigenous people. It has never been a safe place for Asian people. It has never been a safe place for Latino people, for Mexican people. It's never been a safe place for people from the Middle East, people who are Muslim, people who want to practice a different religion outside of Christianity. It's not a safe place for women, for children, for LGBTQ plus people, for disabled people. It's not a safe place for people who fight in our wars, for veterans. White supremacy is American history. And you're perpetuating this myth that of American exceptionalism and America being a shining beacon of democracy when you say America is better than this. And that's okay, because American capitalists and the education system and Texas McGraw-Hill will feed you that myth, will feed you that lie. And that's why I'm here, to help all of you unlearn American history.
Sorry to break it to you, but you were taught whitewashed history from white authors, and I'm going to explain how this plays a key role into our imposter syndrome and why we have a lot of Latinos voting for Trump. If you were taught real history, you were taught why Mexico actually lost their country through deceit. They had to give it up because they had no choice. Or better yet, you would have been taught how it was legal in Texas to lynch Mexicans. What about that the U.S. has been using delousing procedures with Zyklon B and other chemicals to clean Mexicans at the border that were coming here to work, and these same procedures were used to inspire Nazi gas chambers. Weren't you taught about the Zoot Suit riots here in LA? Why weren't you taught that indigenous people, aka Mexicans, and all of those people that come from Latin America were also enslaved next to our Black brothers and sisters? That we were also not allowed to go into the restaurants or their theaters, or better yet, how we weren't allowed to use the pools until the very last day prior to cleaning because we were deemed as dirty. Prior to Brown versus Board of Education, it was actually a Mexican and Puerto Rican family that helped desegregate the schools here in California in the OC. And that case is known as Mendez versus Westminster. And the young lady that went into that school first, the desegregated school, is actually still alive today. You can look it up. How about why were you not taught about the Chicano movement and how hard we worked after desegregation to get brown teachers into the school so people would not make fun of our names anymore? Or better yet, how we were tired of the Latina women asking for clarity in their education only to be told there's no point in teaching you this because you're going to end up pregnant anyways. Why is it that in Black and brown communities, we are taught that voting doesn't fucking matter and everything is rigged? If it did not matter, why are they burning ballots? Is there voter intimidation? I lived in the South, outside of this progressive bubble that is LA. And let me tell you, their racism is right in your face. They tell you that you don't deserve to be here. They tell you how stupid you are. And I'm here to let you know you need to go to school. Ain't no way the Chicano movement fought for us to get a better education. The Chicano movement asked and fucking demanded that we had Chicano studies. You don't know this. They don't want to teach you that we fought for this shit. They don't want to teach you that we fought for the right to vote, or better yet, that we fought for our fucking juries to look like us, because the reason we were getting killed through the death penalty or in prison is because white peers were judging us. You weren't taught this shit in order to divide us, because if you somehow think that you're better than Black people or you're better than anybody else, you are gonna then vote white. You are not white. You are not. We have suffered the same fate as our Black brothers and sisters, but it is not publicized because the US wants to continue the fucking narrative that just because you're Black, you're born criminal, and they are not. I'm gonna fucking check every Hispanic or Latino's fucking prejudice and racism. I'm tired of this anti-blackness. I'm fucking tired of it. It doesn't only just happen to the African American community. Anti-blackness exists on an Afro-Mexican level and Afro-Latino level, and I need us to fucking wake the fuck up. Start questioning everything. Question everything and think critically. Everything that you fucking know, ask yourself, who taught me that? Who taught me to be Christian? Who taught me to hate these people? Who taught me to not believe in myself? Why don't I feel like I belong? Who taught me that I was Mexican, El Salvadorian, Guatemalan? What does that mean? What's underneath nationality? Who am I really? Because if you dig even deeper, you're gonna fucking know that we all came from Africa. You're also going to know that we are indigenous and that the term Latino and Hispanic was coined by white people. Why would I say I'm Latina and Hispanic? From the people that fucking persecuted, murdered, and committed genocide against my own people. Why the fuck would I do that? I need you to start learning and start reading and start decolonizing your mind.
You only know history that is taught to you by the textbooks and in classroom. Then, my dear friend, you do not know history at all. Because the history that you're learning is history that has been written by the winners of history. It is the history that has been whitewashed to make sure that white people are comfortable with what their ancestors did. And make sure that the people who are actually hurt, mistreated, and tortured by your ancestors, this is the white people, that their voices are not heard, that their history is erased, and that they continue to be a minority and an oppressed group of people. And if your spirit does not sit right with seeing people getting oppressed, seeing people still being used, still having racism being used against them, and still being treated like they're less of human than you, then you need to learn about your history. You need to learn about why is it that you feel uncomfortable inside your spirit with what the things that you're saying, even though you have been taught in class that whatever they did was good. Because America likes to celebrate its heroes, but they usually never talk about the crimes that their heroes did. And they continuously celebrate, like Christopher Columbus, we have a holiday to celebrate him, and his discovery of America, which you cannot discover a place that was initially habited by other people. But yet, America celebrates him for some reason, and yet he invaded our country, brought diseases, killed so many people, erased so much of their history, and then said, okay, you know what, this is now my land, and I call it America, and all these people are gonna go below me. They're now below me, and I am superior to all of them. Just because these people are nice and welcoming to me, I choose to be above them because they don't know what they're doing. And that is the problem with white history and the history that you're taught in school, because you're not taught the side of the oppressed, because their voices have been silenced. You cannot really quite understand what these other people are going through, these minority groups are going through, because you haven't been given the opportunity to actually learn what they actually go through. And that's why you hear so many people tell you, like so many people who have been oppressed or their ancestors have been oppressed, they tell you that it's that deep. And when you hear that it's that deep, you don't really quite understand what they mean. But you know what you can do to understand? You can try and learn history by yourself. And not the history that you're taught in class. Do not ask a white person about your history. Ask those people who are actually telling you that it's that deep. When they're actually angry about the actions that you're doing, about the country that you're living in, continuously doing certain things to make sure that they remain below, ask those people, what do you mean by it's that deep? And then you'll get a deeper understanding. But before I give my full commentary, as you can see, I'm very passionate about this. Kindly do consider commenting. What do you think about this particular topic? Also, kindly subscribe, share, and like as we continue to learn together in this channel. And let's dive in and listen to what other people have to say, and then I'll come back and give my full commentary. See you shortly.
This whole chapter dedicated, chapter 4, to the American Revolution. You would think that in a chapter all about the American Revolution, we would start to get it into the ideas, what people were feeling, the debates they were having, the tension between opposing sides. No, none of that is present in this book. At best, this book is talking about some of the events that triggered the Declaration, but not the ideas, not the values, There's no synthesis. There's no why. None of that is put together at all. It's just, here's these things that happen. One thing led to the next. And think of it, right? When I was a young kid being forced to read from history books like this, I would always just wonder, who cares? Why does this matter? It's just this, it's like reading a journal of sorts. It's like, this happened, then this happened, then this happened, then this happened. And I never understood as a kid, why does any of this matter to me today? And no one could ever answer that question for me because no one taught me history the right way. That's why we've done the new book that we have.
Crazy how we're forced to learn a whitewashed version of history, and then if we actually want to learn anything outside of that, we have to then go to college and then pay thousands and thousands of dollars to get the information that we want to learn about. You know, granted, you can just look it up, obviously, and you can read books and, you know, gather that information yourself. But in terms of like education-wise and like having a certificate for knowing that information, you have to go to college if you want to learn about indigenous things that happened in the Americas, the Native people, African Americans, just literally the whole culture of America and all of the actual history, not just the whitewashed version of the history and then basically like skimming over all the racist, crazy shit. Because that's literally what it is when we are forced to learn history. And then after learning history that they wanted us to learn, then we can choose to, you know, learn the history that we want and then, you know, get a degree for it. But that's going to cost thousands and thousands of dollars. And it's just so crazy. Like, we literally in the American public school system literally just go to school and learn a whitewashed version of history. And that's what we're just told to believe. And that's just what it's supposed to be. And there's not really any more deeply critical thinking until college, but you have to pay thousands and thousands for that, go into debt for that.
I found out if you look through history, all through humankind, at one point in history, every group of people has been slaves at least one time. Even white people. And white people, they erase yours from history. But I'm here to tell you, in front of all these minorities, here's the truth, white friends. Y'all were some of the worst slaves that ever existed. Y'all was terrible white slaves.
When the descendants of defective sibling DNA start calling indigenous people uncivilized, it's projection. Because in the 1500s, their lice-infested, disease-ridden ancestors dragged over 30 deadly diseases to this continent, which killed off more than 80% of the indigenous population because they were walking biohazards who did not bathe. These are people who literally threw their feces and urine outside of their windows and watched it fester in the streets until it rained and turned their towns into diarrhea soup. Meanwhile, indigenous people in the 1500s had public sanitation, organized waste removal, clean streets they swept and washed daily, and people who bathed daily, sometimes twice. We literally had to teach these plague-carrying invaders how to wash their asses. And then Mr. Trump University says we lived in tents. Tents? Our cities had towering architecture and stone temples that dwarfed anything in Europe during that time, in the Americas and in Africa. And since you mentioned Africa, Africans were master architects who gave the world mathematics, astronomy, medicine, and engineering. Europe produced the colonizers who stole it all. Europe gave the world genocide, colonization, and syphilis. And some of y'all today still don't bathe.
I'm in the Rijksmuseum right now in Amsterdam, and I'm in a room that is covered with ship models and model ships. Many of these are from the Dutch golden age of, quote-unquote, golden age of exploration, trading, and colonization. One ship in particular that caught my attention was this tall-masted white ship in the center of this exhibit display. There's a small plaque in a dark corner of the museum that explains what this ship is. The extra wide hull and the extra tall masts identify this as a Dutch merchant ship specializing in the trade of enslaved people. The ship is named as the White Elephant, de Witte Olifant, and it was specifically designed for African slave trade. And the most disturbing part about this ship is the tall masts. You can see that from all of the other ships in the display. That one has clearly the highest and tallest masts for the largest sails. The reason that it needed those sails was to go as fast as possible across the Atlantic because the human beings would die. Even with these ships being the most high speed of any of the Dutch ships at the time, still close to 1/4 of the human beings on board who were being brought across the Atlantic as enslaved workers would die in the crossing. The fact that these new ships were designed faster with bigger and taller masts for this explicit purpose really shows us the fallacy at the root of the saying capitalism breeds innovation. Because really exactly what sort of innovation is being bred here? It's gut-wrenchingly awful and painful. Slavery was an abomination, and the Rijksmuseum needs to do a better job contextualizing and condemning this barbaric practice.
Christopher Columbus in his journal said about the Indians, "They are so naive and so free with their possessions that no one who has not witnessed them would believe it. When you ask for something they have, they never say no. To the contrary, they offer to share with anyone." And he wrote that in his journal, mocking them. Because he came from a land full of the worst kinds of people. And so coming in contact with human beings that were so open to sharing and caring and loving was to be mocked. Horrible people. These people were horrible people. And we have a fucking holiday for Christopher Columbus. We have to start from scratch. There is no we have to pull out every little piece of history that the United States has taught us, grab it and pull it out by our ears and burn it. Burn it. These people were fucking horrible.
As a part of the general education requirements in college, I had to take a history class. So I decided to take what seemed like the easiest option, U.S. History 101. On the first day of class, our German professor handed out a quiz to assess our knowledge coming into the course. It had very basic questions on it like define democracy, define communism, define fascism, define capitalism. It also had some questions like name the 5 biggest countries by population. Anyway, I took the assessment and went on about my day. And on the second day, she pulled me aside after class. She said something along the lines of, "How do you know the answers to these questions?" What? She explained that she was from Germany and she hadn't been teaching in America for very long, and that every semester she was shocked because most students couldn't answer this assessment. And I explained to her that, I wasn't a high school graduate. I was actually coming back to finish a degree, so I was 25, and that my degree was in Spanish. So in order to learn a language at a university level, you usually have to learn about the history of the countries that speak that language, and by proxy, I had learned quite a bit about communism and fascism. She used a textbook in that class called something like U.S. History in the 20th Century, A Global Perspective. And even for me, someone who could answer the assessment, it was eye-opening. Because it was the first time I'd learned about the major events of the 20th century through a lens other than that of the United States. And this would have been in 2015, so right around the time that you started hearing this rhetoric about woke universities brainwashing their students with anti-American propaganda. And while they tried to say that this rhetoric was about critical race theory, I knew immediately that they were also talking about classes like this one, U.S. History 101, because this history class introduced terms like colonialism and imperialism. It taught us just how many times the U.S. has been involved in interfering with democratic elections all over the world. But it was not biased or like pro-communist. It just presented us with the facts of what happened, and then we discussed it from all sides. It was the first time I'd heard that the U.S. helped stage a coup in 1953 to overthrow the democratically elected leader of Iran and reinstate an authoritarian monarch who became so brutally oppressive that it led to the Iranian Revolution of 1979. But I've been thinking about this story a lot lately, just considering how many people in the United States didn't go to college. A lot of people only have the version of history through an American perspective. And now if we try to tell them any other version, it's just the woke universities trying to brainwash us with anti-American propaganda. I went on to become the teacher's assistant for that class for 2 more semesters. I'm not even a history major, I just thought it was fascinating.
Textbook history isn't and wasn't ever about telling you the truth, actually telling you the actual things that actually happened to your ancestors and what actually happened to the minority groups. It was about control. It was about taking control and making sure that the control that they left towards their predecessors remains the same way. Because even one of the women in this videos, the ones I've featured in this video, talks about how America is actually acting the way it's supposed to be acting. We are just new to this because we haven't lived in it. Otherwise, our ancestors, our forefathers, our parents and our grandparents and great-grandparents have lived through the same things. And that's why you find that you will look in social media right now, you can search about what Martin Luther King used to fight about and talk about, what Malcolm X used to talk about, and all these black voices, what those people actually were talking about. And you'll come to see that these are the same things that we're still fighting for as black people right now. And you can see even in the comment sections, people are complaining and saying, we are literally still talking about the same things. Even Louis Farrakhan, you see his preachings from when he was young to when he is where he is right now. It is literally him saying the same things, but in different ways. And those things are actually still applicable to us right now. Meaning there is literally no change that is being made in our country because, in America, because they are making sure that the system that they put in place in the beginning is working for them. And that's why the rich continue being rich and the poor continue being poor. And that's why the minority continue being the minority and continue being treated in ways that are inhumane. And white people continue enjoying their benefits or the whatever they enjoy because they are white. And that's why we have such an unjust system. And you come and wake up in the morning and you're like, okay, what is Trump doing? You open your social media and you see the atrocious things that Trump is doing. He just wakes up and does some very atrocious things. And then you wonder, how is this even happening? But let me give you a challenge. If you even go back to looking at presidents of specifically white presidents, because we've only had one black president in America. You look at those presidents and what they used to do, you will literally see that all these people are copying from the same script. They are all copying from the same script, making sure that the system that was put in place in the beginning is still the one that we are putting in place right now. The only things that they change is making sure that they make you feel like you have a voice right now when you really, really don't. And that's why you see so many black people are still asking for you to change your ways and for you to accept them and for you to leave them alone and for you to just treat them as human and not even recognize that they're just the same way you wouldn't recognize a white person is next to you, the same way. You don't have to stare at a black person when they pass you. They just want you to treat them as a normal human being. That is all they ask for. And you see, you can't do that because of what you have been taught in class and what you have been taught in the movies. Even movies have a huge part that they're playing in making sure that your brain has been set to a certain thing. So you only operate in a certain way, and that way is the way that they want you to think and the way they want to control your thinking. And you will come to find that actually when you read about history, you'll see that there are actually white people who literally, really, really gave their lives and really fought so that black people will be treated the same as they were treated at the time. Because the things that black people used to go through was just torture and inhumane. And some of the things that the black people went through in America as slaves are so inhumane that people, even when they are going to visit these sites, they puke and they can't even finish seeing all these things. And that's why black people, when they tell you it's that deep, honestly, just listen to them. Because when they feel, or when whatever they feel inside themselves, because of what they learn from their history, is nothing to joke around about. And it's nothing to play about. It's something very serious. And it does not settle with their spirit well. So why should they let you sit well with your spirit when whatever you've learned is wrong? Why should they let you live in peace when whatever you have done as a white person and your family has done is literally against them? Why should they? See, it's if the same thing happened to you, would you let those people go? Because actually, to say the truth, white people are the most, well, from what we have seen, they really take revenge to a whole new level. Because you see, white people buy guns and then they kill their parents, they kill their kids, they kill other kids, they just go around shooting people when they're angry. Then ask yourself, where is that anger coming from? It's coming from what you have been taught. You've been taught that history only goes with people who have power. So having power is having a gun and using that gun against anyone who goes against you. You see how they have also colonized your brains as a white person? They have colonized your brains too. And you need to come out of it. You need to learn and you need to support Black people and you need to support these minority groups, especially if you're a person who does not or is uncomfortable with living in a society where people are being treated as animals or not being treated the same as you are being treated. Because mind you, you're not any different. We are all humans, the human race. There's no black race, white race, Asian race. It's just the human race. So if you feel like something is not sitting well with you, do your research, and then next time you can teach someone about it without you having to sit down and feel uncomfortable and be put in a space where you don't really like what's going on. Okay? And without unlearning the myth, white people remain unaware of how deeply racism has shaped the institutions that they benefit from today. So once you do not unlearn the myth, you find that there are so many white people who actually go into public spaces and say that, slavery actually did help Black people. Slavery actually did help them. And I don't know why they continuously say that our people are bad when they were being paid for the work that they used to do. They were actually good slave owners. There were slave owners who were actually good, who gave shelter and food and clothing to these slaves. And they don't understand why Black people are complaining right now. And this kind of thinking is, I don't blame you for it. It's literally what you have been taught. And that's why you find so many white people even... There was this journalist who went on live TV and said that we only talk about the bad things that what white people used to do, but you never talk about the good things that they came with. And she talks about how white people brought civilization, how there are people who are killed by helping us develop our countries. And we don't even talk about how they came to bring us Christianity. They came to bring us education, development. And I just have a question. So once they brought the development and the education and all that, did they now stand up and go? Did they? Because they did build roads. We know that. But those roads were from the mining areas to the up to the shores in the oceans to make sure that whatever they have mined is transported safely to their countries, back to their countries. It's to make sure that the artifacts that they carry from these people and their tribes and their history, that it's carried all the way to their countries. It wasn't for us. It wasn't for us. It was for them. It was for white people. It was for you. And she also talks about how it's so sad that a white toddler has to be taught about how slavery was done and how bad it was. And yet they keep on forgetting that Black kids have to go through the same thing. They don't even have Black people in their minds. Black kids have to be taught how to even walk in the streets, how to even talk to white people, because they don't know what that white person is carrying. They don't know if that white person is carrying a gun and they will kill them. Those babies have to be taught at a very young age how to operate in the society. And yet white boys, white babies, white kids cannot be told about what their ancestors did so that they can carry that burden, so that they don't repeat what their ancestors did. Isn't that funny? That's weird. That's weird. And real progress only comes when the full unfiltered history is acknowledged and not hidden. Textbooks praise freedom and democracy while ignoring oppression. Textbooks often ignore oppression. They often ignore the voices of the people who they actually hurt, because even when these white people were invading African countries and any other country that they invaded, they brought so many diseases. They brought so much uncivility. They were so uncivilized. They brought pain and destruction. They killed they mauled, they tortured. Until you sit with that uncomfortability as a white person, you cannot really make a difference. You cannot really make a difference. And so when a black person or a minority or a person from a minority group tells you it's that deep, it is that deep. And you better believe them. And you better take your time, learn about what they're talking to you about, instead of actually becoming defensive. Anyway, if you have enjoyed today's topic, if you have learned something from it, kindly do consider sharing, subscribing, and liking, because in this channel we like to learn and we like to grow together. And I hope to see you in the next video. Goodbye for now.